Anyone interested in looking for them will find the basic principles of anthroposophy already enunciated in this book. It takes no great effort of will to observe and then think about one's observations. It takes energy to engage in the activity of sense-free thinking. People have to be shown how to get beyond merely poetical, artistic imagination to creative, moral imagination. The content of the philosophy of freedom is not contrived or the results of mystical superstition, but rather in the strictest sense the result of introspective observation verifiable by others. You will find nothing at all in the philosophy of freedom that is derived from clairvoyant communications of spiritual science. It is written for the express purpose of disciplining thinking without any mention of theosophy. In the first decade of the 19th century, August Uhrbeck got word that there were intimate circles in which Rudolf Steinera gave special, esoteric training to those admitted to them. So he asked his teacher whether he too might be allowed to attend. He received the astonishing reply, "You don't need to. You have understood my philosophy of freedom." Those who had no desire to undertake the uncomfortable and demanding pursuit of clear thinking were little attracted to the direction taken by the philosophy of freedom. Too many seeking experience in all sorts of unclear paths, nebulous, mystical approaches, attached themselves to what anthroposophy was trying to achieve in clarity. This group of people attracted the attention of a lot of ill-disposed persons who now attack what people with whom I have no connection whatsoever have been saying. But in these attacks they attribute to me what these vague mystics have produced as their own twisted version of something intended to meet the urgent needs of our modern culture. What is needed is the brightest clarity in everything that has to do with thinking, not vague mysticism. The proper study of this book gives the reader an inner attitude that enables him to stand entirely on his own feet in relating to anthroposophy. It teaches her to present it on her own authority rather than on that of someone else. When, in the bright circles of the spirit, the soul calls forth pure energy of thinking, it lays hold on knowledge of what freedom is. When, entering fully in life, free, conscious man shapes reality from willing, then freedom is made living fact. Steiner initially divides the problem of free will into freedom of thought and freedom of action. He argues that inner freedom is achieved when we bridge the gap between our perception, which reflects the outer appearance of the world, and our cognition, which gives us access to the inner structure of the world. Outer freedom arises when we bridge the gap between our ideals and the constraints of external reality, letting our deeds be inspired by what he terms moral imagination. Steiner considers inner and outer freedom as integral to one another, and that true freedom is only achieved when they are united. My book addresses itself mainly to the question of how philosophy, as an art, deals with the subject of human freedom, what the nature of freedom really is, and whether we already possess it or can develop it. What I called pure thinking in my philosophy of freedom was certainly not well named when judged by outer cultural conditions. For Edward von Hartmann said to me, "There is no such thing. One can only think with the aid of external observation." And all I could say in reply was, "It has only to be tried, and people will soon learn to be able to make it a reality." When is an action free? Only when it has its origin in pure thinking. The philosophy of freedom is a path, a method leading to the actual experience of a thinking detached from the body-soul makeup. Freedom dawns when we enable the will to become an ever mightier and mightier force in our thinking. Out of pure thinking there can flow powerful impulses to moral action that are no longer determined by anything but pure spirit. The intention in my philosophy of freedom is that the reader must lay hold with his own thinking activity page by page. That the book itself is only a sort of musical score, and that one must read the score through inner thinking activity in order to progress continually, out of his own resources, from thought to thought. Who does not sense that he was in a manner been lifted above his ordinary way of thinking into a thinking free of the sense perceptible, and that he moves altogether in this, so that he feels that he has become free in his thinking from the limitations of the corporal nature? Such a person has not really read, in the true sense of the word, this philosophy of freedom. Incomprehensible, baffles the experts. You'll never finish it. It's a tangle of thought. These are the comments on the disappointing experience of readers when Rudolf Steiner first published The Philosophy of Freedom in 1894. Back in the 1890s, when the book was published, people hadn't the least idea what to do with it. It was as though Europeans had been given the book in Chinese and couldn't understand a thing it said. Readers often stop reading the book soon after they begin it, for the simple reason they would like to read it as they do any other book. Other popular books are read in a chaise lounge, letting thought pictures pass in review before one's mind. In The Philosophy of Freedom, readers have to keep shaking themselves to avoid being put to sleep by the thoughts they encounter. One has to try with all one's human strength to activate one's inner being, to bring one's whole thinking into motion. The least honest are those who read The Philosophy of Freedom as they would any other book, and then flatter themselves that they have really taken in the thoughts it contains. They've kept on reading strings of words without anything coming out of it that might be likened to the striking of steel on flint. Now, what kind of reader approach did The Philosophy of Freedom count on? It had to assume a special way of reading. It expected the reader, as they read, to undergo the sort of inner experience that, in an external sense, is really like waking up out of sleep in the morning. The primary purpose of my book is to serve as thought training. Training in the sense that the special way of both thinking and entertaining these thoughts is such as to bring the soul life of the reader into motion in somewhat the way that gymnasts exercise their limbs. The reading of The Philosophy of Freedom should not be a mere reading. It should be an experiencing with inner shocks, tensions, and resolutions.